The screen on my phone buzzed against the cold marble of the restaurant table. I didn't even have to pick it up to see the notification. It was a text from my mom. "I'm stuck at work late, baby. I'm so sorry I'm missing your dinner. Happy 25th birthday. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I stared at the words until they blurred. Under normal circumstances, I would have felt a pang of guilt for her, working so hard to keep our family business afloat. I would have texted back, "Don't worry, Mom, love you," but I didn't, because I wasn't at home. I was sitting in the corner booth of the Gilded Lily, the most expensive steakhouse in the city, and 2 tables away, under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier, sat my mother. She wasn't wearing her scrubs or her work clothes. She was wearing a silk emerald dress I'd never seen before. She looked radiant. She was holding a glass of vintage champagne, her head tilted back in a laugh that sounded like silver bells, and she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her, his hand resting casually, intimately, over hers, was my husband, the man I had married 6 months ago, the man who told me he had a late-night board meeting and couldn't celebrate my birthday until the weekend. My heart dropped. Everything else faded. I watched him lean in and whisper something in her ear. My mother, the woman who raised me alone, the woman I worshipped, giggled like a schoolgirl and tapped his nose. It was a betrayal so layered, so sickening, that I felt my stomach turn. They weren't just lying about being busy. They were together, on my birthday. While I sat alone at a table I'd booked weeks ago, hoping for a surprise that never came. I felt the heat rise from my neck to my cheeks. A cold, hard knot of rage began to form in my chest. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. I didn't care who heard. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip that table and demand to know how long they had been making a fool of me. I took 1 step toward them, then 2. My vision was tunneling. But just as I reached the edge of their peripheral vision, a hand, firm and surprisingly strong, grabbed my elbow. I spun around, ready to snap, but I stopped dead. It was an old man sitting at a small circular table. He had white hair, a sharp tailored suit, and eyes that looked like they had seen 1,000 years of secrets. "Don't," he whispered. His voice was like gravel over velvet. "Let go of me," I hissed, my voice trembling. "You don't understand what's happening." He didn't let go. He leaned in closer, his scent smelling of old books and expensive tobacco. "I understand more than you think, Megan," he said. My blood ran cold. I'd never seen this man in my life. How did he know my name? "Be calm," he continued, his eyes flicking toward the happy couple at the table. "If you go over there now, you lose everything. They've spent months preparing for this moment. They want you to react. They want you to look like the unstable one." I froze. "What are you talking about?" He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive, sliding it across the tablecloth toward me. "Before I tell you what was on that drive, because trust me, it's darker than you can imagine, I need to know, have you ever felt like the person you trusted most was living a double life? If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep sharing these stories with you. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I love seeing how far these stories travel. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. "Go home, lock your doors, watch what's on this, and whatever you do, do not let them know you saw them tonight. If you want your life back, and if you want them to pay, you need to play the long game." He let go of my arm and picked up his wine glass as if nothing had happened. I looked back at the table. My husband was kissing my mother's hand. My mother was smiling at him with a look of pure, predatory triumph. I looked down at the black USB drive. My life as I knew it ended in that restaurant. But as I tucked that drive into my purse and walked out into the cold night air, a new version of me was being born, a version that didn't just want answers. I wanted revenge. I drove home in a trance. The city lights blurred into long, jagged streaks of neon. Every time I stopped at a red light, I looked at the passenger seat where my purse sat. The USB drive felt like a live grenade. I let myself into our darkened penthouse. This place, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture, had always felt a bit cold, but tonight it felt like a tomb. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't take off my coat. I went straight to my home office, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped my laptop. I slid the drive into the port. A single folder appeared on the screen. It wasn't named. I clicked it. The first thing I saw were bank statements, thousands of dollars, my inheritance from my father, bleeding out of our joint accounts into an offshore holding company I didn't recognize. But that was just the financial side. I scrolled down and found the media subfolder. I clicked the first video file. It was grainy, clearly taken from a hidden security camera in our own living room. The date on the timestamp was 3 months ago. I watched myself leave the house for a weekend spa trip, a trip my mother had insisted on gifting me because I looked stressed. 5 minutes after I pulled out of the driveway, the front door opened again. My mother walked in. She didn't have her own key, or so I thought. She pulled a spare from her designer bag like she owned the place. Then my husband appeared. He didn't look surprised. He walked right up to her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her. Not a peck on the cheek. A deep, lingering kiss that made my skin crawl. "Is she gone?" my mother asked on the recording, her voice dripping with a malice I'd never heard before. "She's gone," my husband replied, pouring 2 glasses of our most expensive scotch. "She's so easy to manipulate. She actually thanked me for working late so we could save for a house. She has no idea the house is already in your name." I froze, but I forced myself to keep watching. I watched them sit on my sofa, laughing about how naive and plain I was. They talked about me like I was an obstacle, a bank account with legs that needed to be drained before being discarded. "How much longer?" my mother asked. "The papers will be ready by her 25th birthday," he said, his eyes cold. "Once she signs the trust update tomorrow morning, the transfer is legal. She'll be broke and we'll be in the Mediterranean. We can finally stop pretending." The video ended. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting in my tear-filled eyes. The trust update. He had told me a week ago that since I was turning 25, I needed to sign some routine paperwork to manage the estate my father left me. He'd told me it was to protect our future, the long game. The old man's words echoed in my head. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the garage door opening. My heart leaped into my throat. They were home. Or rather, he was home. I scrambled to eject the USB drive and hide it in the lining of my coat. I shut the laptop just as the front door electronic lock beeped. "Megan? Honey, are you still up?" His voice sounded so normal, so caring. It was the voice of a monster wearing a human mask. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, and stepped out into the hallway. He was standing there, loosening his tie, a faint scent of my mother's perfume, white lilies and vanilla, clinging to his jacket. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "How was the board meeting?" He walked over and kissed my forehead. I had to fight the urge to recoil. Exhausting. Those old guys love to hear themselves talk. "I'm so sorry I missed your big day, babe. Did you have a nice dinner by yourself?" The cruelty of the question almost broke me. Did you have a nice dinner by yourself? While he was drinking champagne with the woman who gave birth to me. It was quiet, I said, forcing a small, pathetic smile. Just what I expected. "Well, I have a little surprise for you tomorrow morning," he said, heading toward the kitchen. "A way to secure our life forever. We'll look at those papers over coffee, okay?" "Okay," I whispered. I went to bed and laid perfectly still, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly beside me. He snored, the peaceful sleep of a man who thought he had already won. But he didn't know I had the USB. He didn't know about the old man, and he certainly didn't know that my father, before he died, had taught me one very important lesson. Never let them see the blade until it's already at their throat. I realized then that the old man wasn't just a stranger. He was a guardian. And the game he had invited me to play was one I intended to win. The next morning, the sun streamed through the penthouse windows with a cruel brightness. My husband was already in the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. He looked like the picture-perfect partner, wearing a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, humming a tune while he plated some fruit. Good morning, birthday girl, he said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. Sleep well? Like a baby, I lied. My voice was steady, a mask I had spent the last 8 hours perfecting in the dark. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. So, about those trust updates, I had our lawyer, well, your mom's lawyer, draw these up. Since you're 25, the final tier of your father's estate unlocks. This just streamlines everything so I can manage the heavy lifting for you. You won't have to worry about a thing. I looked at the top page. Amendment of Trust Assets. I knew exactly what it was. If I signed this, I was handing him and my mother the keys to my father's entire legacy, the company, the offshore accounts, the real estate. I would be left with nothing but the clothes on my back. I trust you, I said, looking him dead in the eye. He smiled, that handsome, crooked smile that used to make my heart melt. Now it just made me want to scream. I know you do, Megan. Just sign at the tabs. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed every single page. I watched his eyes track the pen, a predatory glint appearing in his pupils. He thought he was watching me sign my own death warrant. He didn't realize I had spent 3 hours in the middle of the night on a secure call with my father's actual personal attorney, a man my mother thought had retired years ago. There, I said, sliding the papers back. All done. Perfect, he exhaled, the relief evident in his voice. I'll drop these off at the office. Why don't you go treat yourself to a spa day? You look a little pale. That sounds lovely, I replied. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I didn't go to a spa. I went to a small, nondescript park on the edge of the city. I sat on a bench near a duck pond, waiting. 5 minutes later, the old man from the restaurant sat down next to me. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a simple beige windbreaker and a flat cap. You signed them, he said. It wasn't a question. I signed them, I confirmed. But my lawyer intercepted the digital filing. The documents he has in his briefcase are now legally linked to a shell corporation I just activated. If he tries to move that money, it triggers a fraud alert that goes straight to the federal investigators. The old man chuckled. Smart girl. Your father always said you were the sharpest of the bunch. He knew your mother would try something like this eventually. I froze. You knew my father? The man turned to look at me, his eyes softening. I was his silent partner for 30 years. He kept me in the shadows to protect the business. When he was dying, he told me, watch my daughter. When they think she's at her weakest, that's when she'll need the tools to be her strongest. He handed me a small manila envelope. Your husband thinks he's the only one with a secret life. But he's been sloppy. He's been using your mother's charity foundation to launder money for some very dangerous people. He's not just a cheat, Megan. He's a criminal. I opened the envelope. Inside were photos. My husband meeting with men in dark alleys, receipts for luxury apartments in my mother's name, and most importantly, a copy of a life insurance policy my husband had recently taken out on me. The payout was $5 million, and the accidental death clause was circled in red ink. My heart hammered against my ribs. They weren't just going to leave me broke. They were going to dispose of me. What do I do now? I whispered. Now. The old man said, standing up, you give them exactly what they want. You give them a celebration. Invite them both to dinner tonight. Tell them you have a special announcement. Let them think they've won the ultimate prize. He walked away, leaving me with the photos of my own planned demise. I stood up, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. I wasn't the naive girl they laughed about anymore. I was a ghost haunting my own life, and I was about to turn their celebration into a funeral. I pulled out my phone and started a group text with my mother and my husband. Hey guys, I'm so happy the trust stuff is settled. I want to thank you both for taking such good care of me. Dinner at my place tonight? I have a huge surprise for you both. 7 p.m. Don't be late. The replies came back almost instantly. Mom, can't wait, baby. So proud of you. Husband, see you then, beautiful. I love you. I looked at the screen and smiled. It was the first real smile I'd had in years. Because tonight, The champagne wouldn't be for my birthday. It would be for their downfall. By 6 p.m., the penthouse was transformed. I had ordered the finest catering, the kind of food my mother loved, and dimmed the lights to a soft, inviting glow. I looked in the mirror, smoothing out the wrinkles in my white silk dress. I wanted to look like an angel. I wanted to look like the perfect, unsuspecting victim. I reached into my jewelry box and pulled out a small antique silver locket that belonged to my grandmother. Inside wasn't a photo, but the micro SD card the old man had given me earlier that afternoon, containing the final pieces of the puzzle. I snapped it shut and hung it around my neck. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. "Surprise!" my mother chirped as she walked in, clutching a bouquet of lilies. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lilies were the flowers of funerals. She hugged me tight, and for a second I smelled that same vanilla and lily perfume I'd smelled on my husband's collar the night before. "Happy birthday again, sweetheart," she said, pulling back to look at me. "You look different today." Glowing. "I feel like a weight has been lifted, Mom," I said, smiling through the bile rising in my throat. My husband followed her in, looking smug in a dark blazer. He handed me a glass of wine immediately. "To the future," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "To the new era of the family legacy." We sat down at the dining table. The conversation was light, almost airy. They were in high spirits, practically vibrating with the excitement of their secret victory. They talked about the vacation they thought I should take. "You've been so stressed with the estate, Megan," my husband said, cutting into a piece of medium-rare steak. "Why don't you head up to the lake house this weekend? Just some peace and quiet. I'll join you on Saturday night." I knew what happened at the lake house. It was isolated. The balconies were high. The accidental death clause in that insurance policy suddenly felt very heavy in my mind. "Actually," I said, setting my fork down slowly, "I don't think I'll be going to the lake house. I have a much better idea for a trip." My mother paused, a piece of asparagus halfway to her mouth. "Oh? Where to, baby?" "I was thinking the police station," I said. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. My husband laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "The police? What are you talking about, Megan? Did you have too much wine?" "I saw you both last night," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifyingly steady whisper. "At the restaurant. I saw the champagne. I saw the kissing. I saw the way you looked at each other while you thought I was home crying." My mother's face went from pale to ashen in 3 seconds. She tried to reach for my hand. "Megan, honey, you're confused. I was at the office. I told you." "Stop lying, Mom. It's embarrassing." I pulled my phone out and laid it on the table. I hit play on the security footage from our living room. The sound of their own voices, mocking me, calling me plain and naive, filled the dining room. My husband's face hardened. The mask of the doting partner slipped, revealing something sharp and ugly underneath. He didn't deny it or apologize. He just leaned back and crossed his arms. "Fine," he snapped. "So you found out we're together. It doesn't matter, Megan. You signed the papers this morning. The trust is already being transferred. By tomorrow morning, you'll have nothing. No house, no money, no company. You can go to the police, but infidelity isn't a crime. And the money move? It's all legal. You signed it away of your own free will." My mother regained her composure, her eyes turning cold and predatory. "He's right, Megan. You were always too soft for this world. Just like your father. We're doing you a favor, really. You weren't meant to run a kingdom." I looked at them both, the two people I had loved most in the world, and I felt a strange sense of peace. Because they were so blinded by their own greed, they hadn't noticed the one thing that changed. "You're right about one thing," I said, standing up. "I did sign those papers, but I didn't sign them to transfer the money to you." I walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. I signed an amendment that redirected every single asset into a blind trust for the Old Guard Foundation, a foundation that, as of 20 minutes ago, is now the primary whistleblower in a federal investigation into your charity, Mom. The laundering? The offshore accounts? The feds have been watching those for weeks. All they needed was a signature from the account owner to grant them access to the internal ledgers. My husband stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. "You're bluffing." "Check your phone," I suggested. His phone buzzed, then my mother's. I watched their faces turn from arrogance to pure, unadulterated terror as they saw the alerts. Their personal accounts were frozen. The corporate accounts were flagged. And then the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder and louder, heading straight for our building. "You ruined us," my mother gasped, her voice trembling. "I'm your mother. How could you do this to your own mother?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who raised me. I saw the woman who tried to kill me for a paycheck. "You died to me at that restaurant last night," I said. "And as for the business, I'm not losing it. I'm just cleaning house." The sound of the sirens was no longer a distant wail. It was a rhythmic, pulsing roar that echoed off the glass walls of the penthouse. Blue and red lights began to dance across the ceiling, strobing over my mother's terrified face like a twisted disco. My husband, or the man I used to call my husband, lunged for his briefcase. He was frantic, his polished exterior completely shattered. He looked like a cornered rat seeking a hole to crawl into. "The back elevator," he hissed to my mother. "If we can get to the garage, I have the offshore keys in the glove box. We can be out of the state before they process the freeze." I didn't move. I didn't try to block them. I just leaned against the kitchen island and took a slow sip of my water. The back elevator requires a biometric override when the building is in security lockdown mode, I said calmly. "I changed the permissions this afternoon. Only my thumbprint works now." He froze, his hand on the handle of his bag. He turned to look at me, and for a second I saw a flash of genuine violence in his eyes. He took a step toward me, his fists clenching. "You think you're so smart," he spat. "You think some old man and a few bank statements make you a player? I've spent years building this web. I have people you haven't even met who owe me favors. I'll be out of jail before the sun comes up, and when I am..." "When you are, you'll be broke," I interrupted. "And those people you mention, the ones you've been laundering money for, they don't usually respond well to their funds being seized by the FBI because their bagman got sloppy and slept with his mother-in-law." His face went from red to a ghostly, translucent white. He hadn't thought about that. He had been so focused on stealing my money that he forgot he was playing with fire that didn't belong to him. In the criminal world, losing the boss's money is a death sentence. My mother, meanwhile, had slumped into a chair. She looked older than she had 5 minutes ago. The emerald silk dress didn't look radiant anymore. It looked like a costume. "Megan," she whimpered, reaching out a hand. "Please, I'm your mother. I brought you into this world. Everything I did it to ensure we stayed on top. You don't know what it's like to lose everything. Your father was a dreamer. He didn't understand the grit it takes to survive." "My father understood loyalty," I countered, my voice cutting through her excuses. "He understood that a legacy isn't built on theft. He knew exactly who you were, Mom. That's why he left the old guard clause in his will. He knew that if you ever turned on me, I'd need a way to bury you." The front door didn't just open, it was bypassed with an electronic master key. 6 agents in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back filed into the room, led by a woman with a sharp bob and a no-nonsense expression. "Hands where we can see them," the lead agent commanded. I watched as they stepped toward my husband. He tried to pull away to protest, but within seconds, his hands were zip-tied behind his back. The metallic click of the restraints was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. One of the agents walked over to my mother. She didn't fight. She just stared at me with a look of pure, concentrated hatred. "You'll regret this," she whispered as they pulled her to her feet. "You're all alone now, Megan. You have no one." "I'd rather be alone than in a room full of snakes," I replied. As they led them toward the door, the lead agent stopped and looked at me. "Mrs. Miller, We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to sign the formal affidavits. Your cooperation with the old guard representative has been exemplary." "I'll be there," I said. The penthouse grew quiet again. The red and blue lights faded as the police cars drove away. I stood in the middle of the empty room, surrounded by half-eaten steak and expensive wine that suddenly smelled like vinegar. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to cry for the girl I was yesterday, the girl who believed in happily ever after. But then I felt the weight of the locket around my neck. I walked over to the balcony and looked out at the city. The old man was standing on the sidewalk below, leaning against a black sedan. He looked up, tipped his cap to me, and got into the car. He had told me this was just the beginning. And as I watched his taillights disappear into the night, I realized he was right. My mother and husband were gone, but the web they had spun was massive. There were more people involved, more secrets to uncover, and I finally had the power to burn it all down. The first night of my new life was spent in a silence so profound it felt heavy. I didn't sleep in the master bedroom. I couldn't stand the smell of his cologne that still lingered on the pillows. Instead, I sat in my father's old study, surrounded by the scent of leather and dust, watching the sun rise over the skyline. By 8 a.m., my phone was blowing up, not with texts from family, but with frantic calls from the board of directors at my father's company. News of the arrests had leaked. The socialite scandal of the year was trending, and the company's stock was plummeting. I dressed in a sharp charcoal gray power suit. No more soft silks, no more naive girl. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun and put on a pair of heels that felt like weapons. When I walked into the corporate headquarters, the lobby went silent. The receptionist, who used to barely look up from her phone when I visited, stood up straight, her eyes wide. They expected me to be hiding. They expected a mourning daughter and a betrayed wife. Instead, they got the CEO. I marched straight into the boardroom. The 12 men and women sitting around the mahogany table were mid-shout. "We have to distance ourselves," one man was yelling. "The mother is the face of the foundation and the husband was the COO. We're sinking." I slammed my briefcase onto the table. The noise echoed like a gunshot. "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a request. The room went still. A man named Mr. Henderson, who had been my father's right-hand man and someone I'd known since I was 5, cleared his throat. "Megan, dear, this is a delicate time. Perhaps you should go home and rest. We'll handle the crisis management." "You'll handle it the same way you handled my father's accidental heart attack 3 years ago, Henderson?" I asked, leaning forward. The color drained from his face. The old guard USB drive hadn't just contained videos of my husband's affair. It contained medical records. It contained a list of consultation fees paid to a private doctor the night my father died, fees paid by Henderson and my mother. "I'm not here to ask for your permission to lead," I said, opening my briefcase and sliding a stack of documents across the table. "I'm here to inform you that, as of 9 a.m., I have exercised the founder's contingency. I now hold 51% of the voting shares." "That's impossible," a woman at the end of the table stammered. "Those shares were split between you and your mother." My mother's shares were held in a trust that prohibited any involvement in criminal activity, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. The moment she was booked into federal custody for money laundering, her shares reverted to the secondary beneficiary, me. I sat at the head of the table, my father's chair. "Now," I said, "we're going to talk about the favors my husband was doing for his friends using this company's logistics network. And Henderson, you're going to tell me exactly what was in that vitamin injection you gave my father, or you'll be sharing a cell with my mother by dinner." Henderson's hands began to shake. He looked around the room for an ally, but everyone else was looking at the floor. They were sharks, and they smelled a bigger predator in the water. I was just following orders," Henderson whispered. "Orders are over," I said. "I've already contacted the SEC. We're doing a full forensic audit of every person in this room. If you've taken so much as a paperclip that wasn't yours, I will find it." I looked at my watch. You have 10 minutes to clear out your offices. Security is waiting outside." As they filed out, looking like beaten dogs, Henderson stopped at the door. He turned back, his face twisted in a mixture of fear and admiration. "He was right about you," Henderson said. "Your father. He said you were the only thing in this world he was actually afraid of." "He should have been," I replied. I stayed in that boardroom for hours, rebuilding the structure of the company from the ground up. I wasn't just taking my life back. I was taking my father's legacy back from the people who had turned it into a playground for greed. But as I looked at the list of clients my husband had been working with, one name stood out. It wasn't a person, it was an organization. And the logo next to it was the same one I'd seen on the old man's signet ring. I realized then that the old man wasn't just a friend of my father's. He was something much more complicated. And the long game he mentioned, it wasn't just about my revenge. I was being recruited. The silence of the boardroom was different now. It didn't feel heavy. It felt like a blank canvas. I stared at the logo on the paper, a stylized owl wrapped in a silver chain. It was the same emblem etched into the silver ring the old man wore. I was staring at the heart of an empire that existed in the shadows between law and shadow work. My father hadn't just been a businessman, he had been a gatekeeper for something much larger. And now, the keys were in my hands. My desk phone rang. It was the private line, the one only 3 people in the world had the number for. "The cleanup is going well," the voice said. It was the old man. "Henderson is currently talking to the district attorney. He's naming names to save his own skin, just as we predicted." "Why did you wait?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty office. "If you knew they were killing my father, if you knew they were stealing from me, why let it get this far?" "Because power isn't something that can be given, Megan," he replied softly. "It has to be forged. If I had stepped in a year ago, you would have been a victim I rescued. Today, you are a queen who took her throne. The old guard doesn't need victims. We need leaders who have looked betrayal in the eye and didn't blink." I looked at the city below. I could see the jail where my mother was being processed. I could see the docks where my husband's special shipments were being seized by customs. "What's the next move?" I asked. "Your husband," the old man said. "He's been granted one phone call. He didn't call a lawyer. He called a burner phone in a warehouse in the shipping district. He's begging for a way out. He's offering them your head in exchange for his freedom." A cold chill settled in my marrow. But it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. "He still thinks I'm the weak link." "He does. He's arranged a meeting for tonight. He's convinced the guards he has evidence hidden in the warehouse that will exonerate him. They're transporting him there under heavy guard, or so he thinks. In reality, the men driving that van work for me." "I want to be there," I said. "I thought you might." 3 hours later, I stood in a dimly lit, salt-crusted warehouse near the piers. The air tasted of rust and the Atlantic Ocean. In the center of the room, strapped to a wooden chair under a single flickering bulb, was my husband. He didn't look like the polished executive anymore. His shirt was torn, his hair was a mess, and his face was bruised. When he saw me walk out of the shadows, his eyes widened with a flicker of hope that quickly turned into terror. Megan, thank God," he rasped. "These men, they kidnapped me. They're crazy. Tell them who I am. Tell them we can pay them whatever they want." I walked up to him, my heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete. I didn't stop until I was inches from his face. I could smell the sweat and the fear on him. "I know exactly who you are," I said, my voice a low, dangerous purr. "You're the man who plotted my accidental death for a $5 million payout. You're the man who slept with my mother in my own house. Megan, I can explain. She manipulated me. It was her idea, all of it." He was pathetic. He was throwing the woman he loved under the bus the second things got hot. I leaned in, whispering in his ear, just as he had whispered to my mother at the restaurant. "The men who brought you here don't want money. They want the missing ledger you told your clients you had, the one that proves where the last 50 million went." "I don't have it," he screamed. "I made it up. I just wanted them to help me escape." "I know," I said, straightening up. I'm the one who has the ledger, and I've already sent it to the people you were stealing from. I told them you were planning to use it as leverage to turn state's evidence against them." His jaw dropped. He realized the trap was airtight. I hadn't just put him in jail. I had made him a marked man for the most dangerous people on the planet. Even if he survived the night, he would spend every second of the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. "You're a monster," he whispered. "No," I replied, turning toward the door. "I'm your wife. Don't you remember? Until death do us part." I walked out of the warehouse without looking back. Behind me, the heavy steel doors groaned shut. I stood on the pier, the cold wind hitting my face. The old man was waiting by his car. He didn't say a word. He just opened the door for me. I had one more person to visit, the woman who gave me life, and the woman who tried to take it away. The visiting room at the county jail smelled of floor wax and desperation. It was a stark contrast to the velvet-lined world my mother had spent her life cultivating. I sat behind the reinforced glass, waiting. When she was led out, she wasn't wearing emerald silk. She was in a coarse orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was limp and greasy. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of the woman who used to tuck me into bed, but then her lips curled into a snarl. "Have you come to gloat, Megan?" she hissed, her voice crackling through the intercom. "To see the big bad mother in a cage?" "I came to say goodbye," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the anger that had fueled me for the last 48 hours. "And to give you a status update, the board has officially removed your name from every foundation building. The house in the Hamptons, sold. The penthouse. I'm turning it into a shelter for women who have been financially abused by their families." She slammed her hand against the glass. "That was my life. I built that empire while your father was busy being a visionary. You didn't build it, Mom. You bled it. And now the wound is closed." I leaned in closer, my eyes locking onto hers. "Your husband, well, my husband, is currently being moved to a high-security facility. He's terrified. Apparently, he's realized that state's evidence doesn't protect you from the people he robbed. He'll be lucky to last a month." My mother's eyes filled with tears, not of regret, but of pure, selfish rage. "You're just like him. Your father. You think you're so righteous, but look at what you've done. You've destroyed your family." "No," I whispered. "I pruned the dead wood so the tree could finally grow. You weren't a mother. You were a parasite." I stood up and put on my leather gloves, smoothing the fingers down slowly. "I've arranged for a small monthly allowance to be placed in your commissary account," I added. "Enough for extra soap and the occasional snack. It's more than you deserve. But I want you to remember every single day where that money is coming from. Every bite of food you take is a gift from the daughter you tried to kill." I turned my back on her. I didn't listen to her screams as the guards pulled her away. I walked out of that jail and into the bright, blinding light of a new afternoon. The black sedan was waiting. The old man, who I now knew was named after a title, not a person, stepped out. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered a folder. "The board is waiting for you, Megan," he said. "There's a merger in London that needs your signature, and a leak in the Hong Kong office that needs to be plugged." I looked at the folder, then back at the skyline of the city that used to belong to my enemies. Now it was mine. I wasn't the girl who sat alone at a birthday dinner anymore. I was the architect of my own destiny. I got into the car. "Drive," I said. "We have work to do." The betrayal I felt that night at the restaurant was the hardest thing I've ever faced. But it was also the greatest gift I ever received. It woke me up. It showed me that the people who claim to love you the most can sometimes be the ones holding the knife behind their backs. But here's the thing about knives. Once you take them away, you can use them to carve out a much better life for yourself. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this journey. This story is a reminder that no matter how much people underestimate you, you have a strength inside you that they can never touch. Justice isn't always fast, but when it arrives, it's worth the wait. If you found this story powerful, please subscribe and hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that stories of strong, independent women matter. Before you go, I have a question for you. If you found out the person closest to you was lying, would you confront them immediately, or would you play the long game like I did? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're looking for another story about a woman taking back her power, click the video on the screen right now. You won't want to miss it.